Welcome to the Cowell Coffee Shop. Today we're going to make breakfast with some springtime harvest ingredients from our local fields and farms. So we've got some kale, we've got some fava beans, and we've got some spring garlic, some lemons, some masa, corn flour, and some eggs for my chickens at home. So one thing to remember when you're sourcing is that this time of year is not a time for chili peppers or tomatoes or eggplant. I do use a serrano or a jalapeno here and there this time of year, but what I really like to use is what's coming out of the ground. So there's lots of brassicas and greens. It's a great time of the year for cabbage and kale, for all kinds of spring onions and alliums and garlic, pole beans, sugar snap peas, lots of roots, turnips, beets, radishes. So these are all the kind of vegetables that you want to be incorporating into your cooking this time of year because it's local, seasonal, it's cheaper too to source ingredients that are grown and harvested outside. Hoop house ingredients need to be shipped and they require lots of infrastructure, so they cost more to produce. With kale, I like to wash it, strip it off the stem, and then massage it and let it sit in cold water. So we're going to start off by giving it a quick rinse. So you're just doing a preliminary rinse to get any dirt off, and then remember that we're going to actually soak this again. So now what we're doing is we're going to take it and strip it off the stems from the bottom to the top. These stems are really great for chickens or for your compost pile, but chickens really love them. They're rich in iron. So these eggs have a lot of kale stems, and that goes into the making of them. All right, now that I've got all of my kale stripped off the stem, I'm actually going to physically massage it very vigorously. So you really want to work it. It softens the kale and releases some of the bitterness, especially if we soak it in cold water after this. So I'm really working it, and this is in lieu of cooking it. So it's going to have a lot more nutritional value if we don't cook it. But kale can be pretty intense as far as the texture goes, so this is a way of meeting in the middle where we can still have our kale raw, but it has the same effect as cooking without subjecting it to heat and breaking down compounds. All we're doing is softening the linkages. And you'll get a really robust springtime smell in your nostrils. Look at that. Now we're going to soak it in cold water. Very important to have it cold. If you even want to go more gourmet, you could add a couple ice cubes, and that will actually even make it taste better. The colder the water is, the better. Next up, we're going to zest a little bit of lemon for flavor. The key with zesting is that you want to make sure that you don't dig too deep into the lemon when you go for it. So see here in the middle, there's this white pith. That is a little more bitterness. So you're actually going to want to get as shallow as you can do it and as transparent for flavor. This is going to go into our fava bean chimichurri salsa type thing. And that'll be plenty. Then once we've got it zested, I'm going to line it up and I'm going to cut it into long strips and then go across and mince it into little pieces. And that'll be plenty right there. And actually, because I zested a little bit too much, I'm just gonna throw these zest in with my kale while it soaks to infuse a little lemon flavor in there. So now our kale has been soaked. We see this nice green liquid here. We're gonna drain that off. And I'm gonna remove these pieces of zest that I put in here because they would be a very strong flavor. I'm gonna squeeze out a little more liquid. Try to get it nice and dry and fluffy. You can also spin it. So we've got our spinner here. Gonna give it a good little spin. That nice dry kale, that much more came out. And then I like to leave any greens that are washed. It's good to crisp them back up in the refrigerator briefly. So we're gonna put these in the refrigerator while we work out the rest of our recipe. That makes them taste a lot better and kind of can stiffen them back up. So we've done a lot to this kale. This will kind of reform it a little bit. Next up, we've got our spring garlic. So with spring garlic, It's really lovely flavor. It's not as strong as hardneck garlic, which is dried garlic. This would become garlic if you let it get bigger and you let it dry. But as it is, it's a little milder, so think of it as halfway between garlic and an onion. So what I like to do with spring garlic is I clip off the stem here. These pieces are great in stock if you're making stock. And then I want to go into thin rounds, as thin as I can go. So I'm just moving along. And the big thing here is that I'm just getting nice, really thin pieces. And you can move as slow as you need to. I go until it starts getting almost to the leaves. You're gonna wanna just break it apart a little bit. You can put the stems in your stock, but it is gonna dye it green, so I tend not to do that. Once again, that's a great feed for chickens. We are going to saute our spring garlic. So I'm going on medium heat, a small pan, a little bit of olive oil. I'm gonna let this come up to a shimmer. On an industrial stove like this only takes about 10 to 30 seconds. On your stove at home, if you have an electric stove, it might take closer to a minute. You don't want to throw things into a cold pan. It makes things more greasy. The oil penetrates. So what you really want to have happen is things to heat seal by coming into contact with hot oil. It coats it, but doesn't penetrate. All right, so I'm starting to see a little shimmer action on the oil. I'm going to add in my green garlic. And I'm going to add a good pinch of salt here. And that smells amazing. Okay, now that we're starting to get some browning, we're ready to take it out of the pan. So we're going to take the heat off, and we're just going to transfer it into this bowl. And in this bowl, we're going to mix all of our other ingredients, but give this a little time to cool. I like having a few that are a little rawer and a few that are a little crispy. And I feel like that gives a lot of depth of flavor. So fava beans are a multi-step process. First, we are going to take them out of their pod. Then we are going to do what's called blanching, which involves boiling them very quickly and then dunking them in ice water. Then we will shell them one more time. All right, so we're ready to blanch our fava beans. So we're going to pour them into the boiling water, and we're only giving about 30 to 40 seconds. All right, now we're going to transfer them into our ice water here. So this is going to immediately stop the cooking process. Remember that things keep cooking after you take them off the heat unless you arrest the process. So ice water and blanching is a great way to keep from overcooking vegetables. I'm going to shell these favas directly in with my spring onion. So I'm just squeezing out. And you see how easily they come out. I make a little incision with my fingernail and squeeze it in. We're gonna finish our spring garlic and fava bean chimichurri here. So I took some of the lemons we had. I'm gonna take the seeds out just because I'm squeezing them by hand. This is a nice trick if you don't have a hand squeezer to keep the seeds out. So just squeeze. We're gonna do 2 halves here. That should be plenty. I'm going to add a little olive oil, a pinch of salt, and some zest. I'm going to mix it all together. We've got a beautiful little funky tapenade. All right, the last thing is we provide vacuum sealed bags of masa downstairs in the coffee shop. Masa is ground corn flour. It's a huge part of all kinds of American cooking. And Mesoamerican cooking. So I learned how to make tortillas from a friend of the family, Cruz, that I grew up with. And she taught me that there's a couple important steps here. We're going to pour our masa out into the bowl. She likes to use lard to enrich the dough. So I brought a little lard from home. I cooked a pork belly recently. And I saved some of the lard. So I'm going to use that. If you don't eat meat or you don't have any saved, you can also use coconut oil, but that imparts some flavor that's not necessarily authentic if you're going for a Mexican style tortilla. But coconut oil is a good substitute, or you can just skip it. The most important part of making masa is using really hot water. I'm going to add a couple pinches of salt just for a little balance of flavor, but you want to have the water as hot as your hands can handle it. So I got some going on the stove. I would say this is about 120 degrees, 125. remember that it's gonna cool down when it touches the masa. Now, if you do it too hot, it will burn your hands and it's stuck on your hands. So think of it as like hot clay coating your hands. So start slow. I've done this a lot. What we're gonna do is we're gonna slowly pour in the water and tickle it with our fingertips. If you start in fully with your fingers, it can get in the cracks of your fingers. You wanna kind of tickle it and work it, and we'll slowly work it around. And masa is all about feel. You notice I don't have measurements here. You can always add more flour if it's too wet, or you can add more water if it's too dry. This isn't one of those things where you need to do it in a specific order. Now, as I start getting it more and more incorporated here evenly, I'm gonna start squeezing it and letting it go through my fingers. And you can see it's becoming more and more Play-Doh-like. You really want it to end up as the texture of Play-Doh. So you want it to be wet and moist and pliable, but you don't want it to stick to your fingers. So as I'm working it in, the most important part initially is making sure you don't have pockets of dry dough. And sometimes it's even good to wash your hand at this stage. Notice I'm keeping one hand dry, my left hand, my off hand. Here, now we're ready to start kneading it. Notice there's a little dry flour in here to get it going. I like to work within the bowl to start. It makes a way less of a mess, and you can move it out onto the cutting board once you've got it into a good dough. I forgot my lard, but I am totally okay to add it now. It really doesn't matter. It's pretty bulletproof. And the masa is hot enough that it's gonna melt the lard and work it into the dough. And now I'm starting to feel like it is good to go for the cutting board. Really, it should feel pleasant to work it. You don't want it to be an unpleasant experience where it's sticking to your fingers. So feeling this dough, we're a little wet. So we're literally adding maybe a couple tablespoons just to give a touch more dryness. And you'll want to work the dough for about 5 minutes if you have time. The air pockets in here will result in tortillas having crinkled edges rather than a nice smooth edge if everything goes perfect. So now I'm going to put it back in my bowl, work it a couple more times inside the bowl, and when I'm kneading towards the middle, spinning 90 degrees and going back towards the middle. You're not completely folding, you're folding just towards the middle and working it through. It's very important with dough. So now I've got it to a place where I really feel good about it. I'm gonna leave it to rest for about 10 to 15 minutes. So we're gonna take our masa, we're gonna pinch off, we're going for about a ping pong ball, and we're gonna work it between our hands, up and down, like so, until we have a nice smooth ball. The smoother the ball is, the less likely that you're gonna have crinkled edges or that the tortilla is gonna crack, and you'll get nice, smooth, wonderful, fluffy tortillas. So we got a little ball right there. It's just about right. Then when our tortillas are formed, we're gonna use our Tortilla Press. I got this at a Mexican market for about $12. It's covered with plastic on both sides. You take this, you push it down, not too firm, it depends on your press and what style of tortilla you want. That's a little big, but I like a nice big tortilla. So for my next one, I might not press down as hard. So I went a little gentler this time. I got a nice tortilla. Now you don't want to work too far ahead like this. It's better to have a hot pan and press as you go. All right, I've got my big pan coming up for griddling the tortillas. You want it to be nice and hot. Got my smaller pan coming up. I'm going to use some pork fat because we didn't have any butter, but a little lard is a perfectly acceptable way to cook some eggs. You don't want to have the temperature be too high on eggs, so I'm going to turn this down to a nice low flame, work my oil around. That's like a little shimmery for me, so we want to be careful with eggs because you want to cook them nice low and slow. Checking my heat on here. I'm going to drop 2 tortillas. It's ready to go. Got my tortillas looking good. These are ready for my eggs. I'm going to crack my eggs. Look at that beautiful yolk from my babies. I'm gonna get a little salt on there. And then as soon as the white starts to show, what I like to do is turn it way down, as low as it'll really go without going out, and cover my pan. It's kind of a half measure between over easy and sunny side up. Now we're checking our tortillas Want to make sure they don't stick. And then give them a little flip. And those are looking good. They might need one more. I don't like them too brown. Now we're getting almost ready for plating. So these look nice and ready. So we're gonna put these on here. All right, so our eggs are done. We're gonna start with a little kale on our base here. Then we're gonna add our eggs. You can also do scrambled on this. This is however you prefer your eggs. So I like a nice runny yolk, especially when they look this pretty. Flop that down. Now we're gonna hit it with that fava bean and spring garlic chimichurri over the top. And then just to go the extra mile, I had Elijah, one of our Cowell Coffee Shop workers, grab me some nasturtium flowers from Chadwick Garden. Look at those beauties. And we're gonna just give them each a little nasturtium flower for a little snap. Boom, ready to go. Breakfast tacos, springtime. So that's it. This isn't like a classic recipe. This is just a recipe of like using what we have coming out of the field right now, our fava beans, our spring garlic, our kale, some nasturtiums, and some farm fresh eggs, and making tortillas from scratch. So hope you enjoy.